Well, I worked Houston, I worked Corpus Christi.
Elvis Presley is often called the king of rock and roll, but not everyone agreed he deserved that crown. While millions of fans loved him and cheered for him, there were others, including some well-known celebrities, who didn't feel the same way. A few of them openly disliked him. Some thought he was overrated, while others had deeper reasons for their dislike. What were their reasons? In this video, we'll take a closer look at the stars who had a problem with Elvis and why they felt that way. And at the very top of our list is someone who took things to a dangerous level, a man who was actually arrested for trying to shoot Elvis with a loaded gun, Jerry Lee Lewis.
He played piano for about an hour and a half or so. He said, you know, I think every man should know how to play a piano. I said, I've been trying to tell you that for 2 hours.
Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis Presley were two of the biggest names in early rock and roll. They both came from the South, they both loved gospel music, and they both rose to fame under the same record label, Sun Records in Memphis, Tennessee. But that's about where the similarities ended. While many people thought of them as friends or musical brothers, Jerry Lee Lewis carried a deep jealousy and even hatred toward Elvis Presley. And one night in 1976, that jealousy nearly turned deadly. Back in the 1950s, Elvis was already becoming a superstar. His voice, his looks, his moves, he had the whole country screaming his name. But Jerry Lee Lewis, known as the Killer for his wild stage shows and pounding piano, believed he was just as good, maybe even better. They both worked with Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, who discovered Elvis and later signed Jerry Lee. Sam had big dreams for Jerry. He thought Jerry could become the next Elvis or even outshine him. But Jerry never got that same level of fame. While Elvis was making movies, topping charts, and buying mansions, Jerry was getting into trouble and barely holding on to his career. Even though they were part of a famous jam session called the $1 Million Quartet, alongside Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins, Jerry never forgot how the spotlight always shined brightest on Elvis. Behind the scenes, Jerry Lee Lewis wasn't shy about how he felt. He resented how Elvis got all the praise while he felt overlooked. He often complained that the world worshipped Elvis like a king, while he, Jerry, was treated like an outsider. "He ain't no king," Jerry reportedly said more than once. "There's only one man who plays like me." The anger grew over the years. Jerry's personal life was a mess. He'd married his 13-year-old cousin, causing a huge scandal that hurt his career. He had troubles with alcohol and substances. His temper often got him into fights. Meanwhile, Elvis kept climbing higher, even though his own life was starting to crack behind the scenes. Jerry couldn't stand seeing Elvis so loved while he was forgotten. The bitterness finally boiled over in November 1976. It was just 2 months before Elvis's death. He was living quietly at Graceland, his mansion in Memphis. He wasn't doing many shows anymore. He was tired, worn out, and surrounded by only a few close people. But out of nowhere, Jerry Lee Lewis showed up, drunk, angry, and carrying a gun. This wasn't the first time that week Jerry had gone to Graceland. The night before, he had arrived in his Rolls-Royce, asking to see Elvis. But the gate guard, Harold Lloyd, told him Elvis was asleep. Jerry drove away calmly that time, but later crashed his car and got cited for drunk driving. That alone should have been a warning. But the next night was far worse. On November 23, 1976, Jerry came back again, this time in a Lincoln Continental. On his dashboard sat a brand new loaded pistol in full view. He wasn't calm anymore. He was angry, shouting, and out of control. Lloyd, terrified, refused to open the gate. Instead, he picked up the phone and called inside the house. Elvis, who had been watching the security cameras, saw everything. He told his staff to call the police. In a matter of minutes, 6 patrol cars arrived at Graceland. The officers approached the car carefully. Inside, Jerry had already thrown a champagne bottle through the window, cutting his own face on the broken glass. The police found the pistol, which was cocked and loaded. Jerry was arrested for public drunkenness and carrying a weapon, though the charges didn't really stick. Still, the damage to his reputation was huge. Rumors immediately began to swirl. Was Jerry trying to shoot Elvis? Had his jealousy finally turned into something darker? Jerry denied it. He said Elvis had called him and wanted to see him. He claimed the gun was a gift from a sheriff at a club he'd just played, and he'd only left it on the dashboard so it wouldn't be hidden. But the way he showed up, drunk, yelling and demanding to be let in, made people believe otherwise. For years, Jerry Lee Lewis had tried to pretend he didn't care about Elvis's fame, but that wasn't the truth. Deep down, he hated being in Elvis's shadow. No matter how hard he tried, Jerry couldn't escape the comparison. He had the talent, he had the energy, but he didn't have the crown. Jerry Lee Lewis always felt that Elvis Presley had taken the fame and spotlight that should have been his. He believed he had the real talent, but it was Elvis who became the king of rock and roll. So when Elvis's life and career started going downhill in the 1970s, Jerry didn't feel sorry for him. Instead, he saw it as the fall of a man who had once stood at the top, and in a strange way, it made him feel satisfied, like the world was finally seeing Elvis as human, not as a legend. But Jerry's own life wasn't going well either. His career had been full of highs and lows. He struggled with substance and alcohol addiction, lost close friends and family, and had fights with many people around him. So maybe when he showed up at Graceland in 1976, it wasn't just to visit Elvis. Maybe it was also to face his own regrets, the what-ifs of his life. Elvis died just months later in August 1977 at only 42. Afterward, Jerry spoke kindly about him, calling him a great artist. But people wondered, was he sincere or just relieved the competition was gone? Jerry had outlived the king, but that didn't bring peace. He often said he was the greatest, that his talent was one of a kind. Still, deep down, he knew the truth. The world had chosen Elvis, and always would. Next on our list is someone who had no idea Elvis was secretly helping President Richard Nixon keep an eye on him. John Lennon.
You know, you went to see those movies with Elvis or somebody in it when we were still in Liverpool, and you'd see everybody waiting to see him, right? And I'd be waiting there too. And they'd all scream when he came on the screen.
There was a time when John Lennon thought Elvis Presley was everything. As a boy growing up in Liverpool, Lennon was mesmerized by Elvis's voice, his swagger, and the way he made music feel dangerous and alive. Lennon once said, "Before Elvis, there was nothing." To him, Elvis wasn't just a singer, he was a revolution. But that admiration wouldn't last. Years later, when Lennon finally met Elvis in person, something broke. What should have been a dream turned into one of the most uncomfortable and disappointing encounters of Lennon's life. Politics, personality, and Presley's changed image shattered the fantasy Lennon had clung to for so long. In the 1950s, young John Lennon and his friends in Liverpool were obsessed with American rock and roll. They listened to Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, and Little Richard. But most of all, they worshipped Elvis Presley. His slick hair, curled lip, and rebellious sound sent waves across the world, even into working-class Britain. Lennon copied Elvis's style. He even tried to sing like him. When he formed the Quarrymen, who would later become the Beatles, it was in the spirit of what Elvis had made possible. Without Elvis, Lennon always said, there would be no Beatles. But time and fame have a funny way of changing things. By 1965, both Elvis and the Beatles were global superstars. While Elvis was still the king of rock and roll, the Beatles were now the biggest band in the world, sparking a new youth revolution and pushing rock music into deeper, more political territory. That year, while the Beatles were touring the US, a meeting was arranged. The Fab Four were finally going to meet Elvis at his house in California. It should have been magical. Instead, it was awkward from the start. According to multiple accounts, when the Beatles walked into Elvis's mansion, the atmosphere was strange. The room was dim. Elvis was lying on a couch watching television. He didn't jump up to greet them. There were no cheers or jam sessions waiting. It was quiet, almost cold. The Beatles sat around uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. Eventually, Elvis said, "If you guys are just going to sit there and stare at me, I'm going to bed." It was a joke, but it didn't break the ice. Some small talk followed. A few instruments were passed around. They played a little music, but the magic was gone. Lennon later said the meeting was about as exciting as meeting Engelbert Humperdinck. He had expected to meet the rebel Elvis, the rock pioneer with fire in his eyes, but instead he saw a man who had become tame, safe, and surrounded by yes-men. And then it got worse. In Elvis's living room, Lennon noticed something that instantly made his stomach turn. On a table were decorative lamps shaped like wagons, engraved with the words, "All the way with LBJ." That was a reference to President Lyndon B. Johnson, the man responsible for escalating the Vietnam War, a war John Lennon openly despised. Lennon, the outspoken pacifist, was furious to see his childhood idol displaying support for something he found morally wrong. He didn't hold his tongue. According to journalist Chris Hutchins, Lennon immediately made his anti-war feelings known. The atmosphere, already tense, became icy. Elvis, on the other hand, was a proud American, a patriot. He didn't like radicals, protests, or rebellion, not by the late 1960s. He supported the war and the government, and to him, Lennon represented everything going wrong with young people, substance politics, rebellion, and disorder. In that moment, any chance of friendship between the two died. That meeting was the only time Elvis and Lennon ever met in person. But the bitterness didn't stop there. Lennon left feeling deeply disappointed. He no longer saw Elvis as a musical leader. He saw him as someone who had sold out, abandoning the raw, gritty rock and roll for cheesy Hollywood movies and safe ballads. Lennon thought Elvis had become a puppet of the establishment. Elvis, for his part, didn't keep quiet either. He told close friends like Tom Jones that he thought Lennon was a troublemaker and a threat to American values. He was especially bothered by Lennon's anti-war activism, his protests, and the way he influenced young fans to question authority. In fact, Elvis took things a step further. In 1970, Elvis wrote a now famous letter to President Richard Nixon asking to be made a federal agent at large. It was bizarre and dramatic, but Elvis was serious. He believed America was in danger from substance culture, radical leftists, and celebrities who were destroying the youth, and he specifically mentioned the Beatles. According to reports, Elvis encouraged Nixon and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to have John Lennon deported. He told them Lennon was using his fame to stir up trouble, promote substance use, and influence American kids in a dangerous direction. Lennon never tried to hide his disappointment. In interviews, he made sarcastic remarks about Elvis's career choices. He joked about Elvis singing silly songs in bad movies. He asked publicly, "What happened to the old rock and roll Elvis?" Lennon wasn't just mocking Elvis, he was mourning him, mourning the artist he once believed in, the rebel who had inspired him to dream, to shout, to start a band. Now, that rebel was gone, replaced by someone safe, controlled, and loyal to the very government Lennon distrusted. Despite their clash, there's no denying that Elvis shaped John Lennon's path. Even when Lennon released his 1975 album Rock and Roll, a tribute to the music of his youth, Elvis's influence was all over it. The album didn't include any of Elvis's songs, likely for legal reasons, but the spirit of early rock, the energy of Presley's early years, lived on in every track. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. Lennon never stopped loving the idea of Elvis, the music, the rebellion, the spark that changed his life. But the man, that was different. Elvis Presley and John Lennon were both giants, leaders of two different musical revolutions. But their values, their worldviews, and even their personalities were miles apart. Elvis stood for tradition, loyalty, and pride in country. Lennon stood for protest, change, and peace. They both rose to power in a span of less than 10 years, but by the time they met, it was clear. They were from different worlds. Up next is someone who began as one of Elvis's biggest critics. But over time, everything changed. Frank Sinatra. By the time Elvis Presley rose to fame, Frank Sinatra was already a music legend. In the 1940s and early 1950s, Sinatra was the king of cool. People knew him as Old Blue Eyes, the smooth, classy singer who ruled the world of swing and jazz. He wore sharp suits, sang love songs in fancy clubs, and hung out with Hollywood's biggest stars. For a while, Sinatra was popular music. But when rock and roll exploded in the mid-1950s, everything began to change, and Sinatra didn't like it one bit. Elvis Presley, with his wild energy and bold moves, became the face of this new sound. But to Sinatra, it wasn't music, it was noise. In 1957, he wrote a scathing article for a French magazine slamming rock and roll. He called it brutal, vicious, ugly, and degenerate. He said it was fake, harmful, and dragging music into the gutter. He went even further, calling rock singers cretinous goons with dirty lyrics who only appealed to sideburned delinquents. There was no doubt he was talking about Elvis. To Sinatra, Elvis was raw and unpolished. He didn't see talent in the hip-shaking shows or the screaming fans. Instead, he thought Elvis was just yelling into a microphone, without the elegance or vocal training real singers had. Sinatra valued control, tradition, and a sense of class. Elvis represented the opposite: freedom, rebellion, and something dangerously new. Naturally, these words stirred up strong reactions. Fans were shocked to hear such harsh criticism from a music icon. Many artists in the growing rock and roll world felt insulted. But Elvis didn't strike back. When asked about Sinatra's harsh comments, he stayed respectful. He didn't start a feud or throw insults. That calm response only made fans admire Elvis more. In the end, the clash between Sinatra and Elvis wasn't just about two singers, it was about two generations. One stood for the old world of smooth jazz and polished crooners. The other led a loud new movement full of energy and change. And whether Sinatra liked it or not, Elvis had arrived and he wasn't going anywhere. "He has a right to his opinion," Elvis said, "but I can't see him knocking it for no good reason." Elvis said he admired Sinatra as a performer and an actor. He even reminded people that when Frank started out, he was part of a trend too, just like rock and roll was now. Elvis believed the music he sang connected with people in a powerful way. "It's the greatest music ever," he said. He liked it and would sure many others feels the same way. He didn't try to fight fire with fire. He simply stood up for the music and the people who loved it. Sinatra didn't back down right away. He continued to look down on rock and roll as a whole. In 1957, when asked about Elvis's talent, Sinatra said something that would later sound quite ironic. "Only time will tell," he said. In other words, Sinatra thought Elvis's fame might just be a fad. He didn't think Elvis had staying power. Of course, history would prove Sinatra very wrong. As the years passed, things began to change. Sinatra started to soften. Maybe it was because Elvis had proven himself time and time again. Maybe it was because the world clearly loved him. Or maybe Sinatra simply saw that Elvis wasn't trying to steal his spotlight, he was just doing what he loved. By 1960, the two men were ready to appear together in public. Elvis had just returned from serving in the U.S. Army, and for his first big appearance back in the spotlight, he chose to do it on none other than Frank Sinatra's TV show. It was called the Frank Sinatra Timex Show, Welcome Home, Elvis. At that moment, everything shifted. The two men shared the stage. Sinatra sang Elvis's hit Love Me Tender, and Elvis returned the favor by singing Sinatra's classic Witchcraft. The performance was warm and playful, the crowd loved it, and more importantly, the mutual respect was finally visible. It was a powerful moment, one that told the world whatever tension had existed before, it was now in the past. After the TV special, the two stars continued to stay in touch. Over time, their relationship became a genuine friendship. Sinatra's opinion of Elvis changed completely. He began to see the man behind the music. He saw someone kind, respectful, and deeply talented. When Elvis got married to Priscilla in 1967, Sinatra even did him a huge favor. He lent Elvis his private jet so the couple could fly in style. That's not something you do for someone you don't like. It was a clear sign that whatever bitterness Sinatra had felt before had turned into true friendship. In the mid-1970s, things started to fall apart for Elvis. His health was failing. He was addicted to prescription pills. He was struggling emotionally, gaining weight and losing energy. The king of rock and roll was slowly fading. Around 1975, 2 years before Elvis died, Sinatra picked up the phone and called him. He was genuinely concerned. Sinatra's publicist, Chris Hitchens, later shared what was said during that call. According to him, Sinatra told Elvis that he has to look after himself and quit fooling around. That call meant something. It wasn't just a polite gesture. It was Frank reaching out, man to man, artist to artist. He knew what it meant to be lonely at the top. He knew what the pressure felt like. And in that moment, he wanted to help. On August 16, 1977, the world was stunned by the news that Elvis Presley had died. He was only 42 years old. People cried. Tributes poured in. The world mourned the man who had changed music forever. Among those deeply shaken was Frank Sinatra. By that time, Sinatra had long let go of his early criticism. He was no longer the man who called rock and roll rancid-smelling aphrodisiac. He had come to admire Elvis, not just for his talent, but for the human being he had come to know. Sinatra spoke publicly about Elvis after his passing. He called him a warm, considerate, and generous man. His words were honest and full of emotion. It was clear that Sinatra truly admired Elvis and was heartbroken to see him go so young. The relationship between Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley is more than a story of rivalry. In the beginning, Sinatra saw Elvis as a threat. He didn't understand the loud music, the hip-shaking dances, or the wild fans. But with time, he saw the truth. Elvis wasn't just a trend. He was a talent. He was real. And he deserved the love he received. Elvis, on the other hand, never spoke badly of Sinatra. Even when criticized, he remained respectful. He understood the value of history and tradition, and he always honored those who came before him. Their friendship wasn't instant. It took years, a little patience, and a lot of heart. But in the end, the crooner and the king found common ground, built a bond, and left behind a legacy not just of music but of mutual respect. And the last person on our list denied the king the rights to her song, Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton?
The rights to the publishing of the song. I said, I can't do that. This song's already been a hit with me, and this is in my publishing company, and obviously this is going to be one of my most important copyrights.
Is a legend. She's known not only for her big voice and even bigger heart, but also for her sharp mind when it comes to music and business. Over the years, she's written hundreds of songs, built an empire, and become one of the most respected figures in country music. But there's one story in her long career that still leaves a sting, a moment when she had to stand up to none other than Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. It all started with a song. In 1973, Dolly wrote "I Will Always Love You," a gentle, emotional goodbye to her longtime musical partner, Porter Wagoner. The song wasn't just about leaving someone she cared for, it was also about moving on without losing respect. That message, wrapped in Dolly's voice and words, made the song deeply personal. The track became a huge hit. It topped the country charts and became one of Dolly's most beloved songs. But more than that, Dolly knew the song's value. It wasn't just a tune she sang on stage, it was a pillar of her publishing company and a piece of her legacy. So when Elvis Presley showed interest in recording it, Dolly was stunned and excited at first. By the mid-70s, Elvis was still a towering figure in music. Even though his glory days were fading, his name still carried weight. If he recorded a song, that song would be heard around the world. So when Dolly got word that Elvis wanted to record "I Will Always Love You," she was thrilled. The king of rock and roll singing one of the most tender songs she'd ever written. It would have been monumental. But then came the phone call. Elvis didn't call Dolly himself. Instead, it was Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's powerful and famously greedy manager. He had a rule, one that rubbed many songwriters the wrong way. If Elvis recorded a song, the publishing rights had to be split 50-50ths. That meant the original songwriter, no matter who they were, would have to give up half the ownership and future earnings of their own work. Dolly was young, but she wasn't naive. She'd worked hard to build her music catalog and her publishing company. She'd already seen how easily women in the industry were taken advantage of. She wasn't going to let that happen, not with this song. That song, she later said, was the most important copyright in her whole publishing company. So she did what few dared to do in that era. She said no, and it broke her heart. Dolly didn't just walk away from the deal. She walked away angry. She felt disrespected, not by Elvis's interest in the song, but by the assumption that she'd just hand over half her rights. She had admired Elvis from a distance. She thought of him as a talented performer, someone with charisma and charm. But in that moment, she began to see a different side, one tied to greed, control, and pressure. She didn't like it. In later interviews, Dolly admitted she cried after turning down the deal. Not because she regretted it, but because she realized just how much power people like Parker and maybe Elvis himself thought they had. She felt like they expected her to roll over and accept their terms without question. In later years, Dolly opened up about the moment. Though Elvis never publicly commented on the situation, Dolly couldn't shake the feeling that he was fully aware of what his manager was demanding. And that bothered her. Elvis didn't care about her, she once told a friend. He cared about the song and the money it would bring in. If he truly loved it that much, he could have fought for it. Elvis never called Dolly to explain what happened. He didn't apologize, didn't offer any kind of reason, he just let the moment pass. And Dolly did the same, but deep down there was still a bit of bitterness. To her, it wasn't just about the money, it was about being respected. She didn't like the idea that she had to give in to someone just because they were a bigger star. Dolly knew the value of her songwriting, and she believed it deserved to be treated with real respect, no matter who you were. For years, people said it was a shame that Elvis never recorded "I Will Always Love You." Fans dreamed about what his deep voice could have done with Dolly's beautiful lyrics. But Dolly never dwelled on it. She moved forward. Then, in the early 1990s, something incredible happened. Whitney Houston recorded the song for The Bodyguard. It became a massive worldwide hit, topping charts everywhere and turning into one of the most beloved love songs of all time. Still, one moment years later softened things a little. After Elvis passed away, his ex-wife Priscilla Presley once told Dolly that when she and Elvis finalized their divorce, they walked out of the courthouse together, and Elvis quietly sang "I Will Always Love You" to her. That moment moved Dolly deeply. It showed her that even though Elvis never got to record the song, it had touched him personally. Even so, the bitter memory of that business deal never fully went away. Dolly has always been gracious in public, never speaking badly about Elvis. She smiles when she tells the story, but you can feel the truth behind her words. That being pushed aside, that feeling of being told your work isn't worth as much as someone else's fame, stays with you. Dolly never forgot what it felt like to stand her ground. She never forgot what it took to say no to one of the biggest stars in the world. And she never forgot how close she came to losing the song that would later change her life forever. Now it's your turn. Which of these stars surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell. And hey, click on the next video showing on your screen to keep watching more juicy celebrity stories.